Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I'm joined today by Mr. Michael Morris. Michael, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Nick. Nice and sunny in the Cape for a change. No rain and wind and storms and all the rest of it.
It seems like you got all of your rain out of the way at the beginning of the week.
I hope so. I hope so.
I think the rain got everyone in Cape Town out of the way.
Yeah, definitely. And we are also joined by Sara Gon. Sara, how are you?
Well, we had some nice rain. Was it last night? The night before? I'm losing track. I think the night before. Nice. Little, not Cape Town style.
No, exactly. It was very refreshing. I must apologize to listeners if I seem a little bit odd today. I slipped and fell down some stairs shortly before the show, and so I'm a little bit in pain. But anyway, the show must go on, as they say. Let us start off with a story we've been talking, I think, quite a lot about recently, and that is the sheer level of the incredible level of violence in KZN against its municipal councillors. So the Msunduzi municipality in KZN, which is the one around Pietermaritzburg, is looking at reducing the number of attacks on its councillors by perhaps providing them with bodyguards, or at least having a security policy which seeks to protect their councillors from being murdered. This comes a month after a councillor was murdered in the area. Councillors from all parties seem very concerned, from the IFP, ANC, DA, etc. Currently, only the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the speaker have bodyguard protection, as well as 3 senior officials in the municipality. All the parties in that municipality seem to be in favor of this. The DA has praised it, the IFP has praised it, the ANC has praised it, saying we really need to do something about this. Bheki Cele was recently talking about the scale of violence in KZN. Since 2018, they had looked into 321 cases of either murder or attempted murder, 77 of intimidation against councillors. 348 suspects have been charged in 233 cases. There were 52 murder cases in the last 5 years. 31 were ANC councillors, 14 were from the IFP. The NFP lost 4 councillors, the EFF 2, and the ACDP 1. And there were in total 103 municipal officers and political office bearers killed in that period. So it's a very serious problem. And I guess the question here, and let me start with you, Michael, is we often complain about the incredible amounts that particularly cabinet ministers and such spend on bodyguards. And we've seen recently that case, with Paul Mashatile, the deputy president, where the bodyguards were beating up people on the side of the road and just acting like thugs. And that's not a new story. But, in the short term, like in these KZN municipalities, one really does have to ask the question, what is government supposed to do? And maybe they should be rolling out more bodyguards. Considering the increasing gangsterization and mafiaization of so much of South African politics, at least until the police services are fixed and our political culture has calmed down a bit, maybe we should consider spending more on VIP protection, not for the sake of politicians' egos, which seems to be what it's mostly been used for up till now, but actually for protecting people's lives. What do you make of that?
I mean, I think there is an argument, or a growing argument, that this must be at least the short-term rational response to what is becoming a very grave threat. I think, if one were to make that argument, I think perhaps the caveat ought to be that the emphasis at the moment appears to be on cabinet ministers who don't really appear to be at that great a risk and have a huge sort of security detail with umpteen cars and all the rest of it. Perhaps some of that spending needs to go down to the level where the risk is greatest. Those figures in Gauteng in absolutely shocking, aren't they? Just within the Times Life story, I was caught by a reference to another story. Headline: Slain Ward Councillor's family was planning to raise money to pay for security. This was 4 days ago, and a different man entirely from the one
Yes.
that covered today. So one does have a sense, it's just days apart. You have these news reports on on the risk. And what it is really a risk to is a risk to politics. It's a risk to our political practice, the way we conduct our democratic process. And what happens, of course, if the councillor is killed, there's immediately a by-election. Somebody else gets an opportunity for a job and all the goodies and so on. So one can see the kind of criminal rationale at work here. And it's how does one interrupt that? It needs to be interrupted quite firmly. And I guess you're quite right that a sensible option might be to look at maybe devolving that or refocusing the VIP protection downwards to the level of politicians who are most at risk. And it's very clearly, certainly in KZN, at municipal level.
But of course, we have also seen so many abuses of the use of bodyguards. So I think a big part of any deployment is going to be ensuring that you hire people who are competent, not people who are just there to be personal muscle for politicians. Because I can very easily see that becoming a problem too. Sara, what do you make of all this? I mean, so we as Michael was just talking about, the competition for political office is a big part of why these murders happen, and the ineffectiveness of the police in catching people ahead of time. And the councillors in KZN are complaining that when they get death threats, it takes too long for the police to respond with proper protective services. What do you think is the solution here, at least in the short term, to solving this problem?
You see, I think the problem, although I agree with Michael, but I think the problem is this: one is the cost theoretically could just be unaffordable. The implementation would be problematic. I mean, you're literally looking at probably at very least 1-for-1 bodyguard to councillor, and the other, I think they're just insurmountable. What perhaps one needs to look at. I mean, I can't remember. There was a figure in the article about how many people have been convicted of these sorts of crimes. And
62 suspects.
Okay, so it's not a huge number, but to the extent, perhaps the media can do the best for us on that, and that is to put this in the sunlight. In other words, why did they kill these people? Who hired them to kill the people? What were they doing for? Because the competition for municipal positions is theoretically the same, or pretty much the same, all over the country. So one suspects that obviously there's an assassination industry in KZN. So, but it's a little bit of the big politicians do get out into the open, and we form our suitably negative opinions of them. Perhaps if that information, or some of that information, can come out into the public domain, it would create a salutary effect, let's put it that way, because it's way too. Even if the police force were fully competent, it would be a tricky thing to manage, unless, of course, the rates of convictions went up considerably. So the attendant risks become higher.
Definitely. What's interesting, though, is that while most of these were due to political problems, there were also other issues. And one of the ones named here, the ones named by Tshwane, were taxi violence, domestic-related issues, business competition, traditional leadership competition, and family feuds. Some of those, I suspect, are a lot more difficult to solve, actually, than the political problem. But Michael, any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I think Sara makes a good point that we need to keep this visible, keep it controversial in a sense, keep the public officials and politicians' minds on it too. I was trying to find a moment ago, and I can't really, not being as tech savvy as a younger person maybe, but trying to simultaneously find something on the IRR website, which was Gareth van Onsselen's very good report of probably 2017, 2018 on political assassinations. That's now, umpteen years ago, a few years ago at least, which he warned this is likely to get worse. It's not going to go away on its own. He looked at all the commissions. The ANC sort of established various commissions to look at it and so on. But the real thing, which underscores Sara's point, I think, is that we've allowed ourselves to become a little bit complacent, and the first telltale sign of that is when the media just doesn't cover something. There's a sense that there's no public interest in it. It's a bit like what happened to AIDS eventually. People just, they kind of knew it was a big problem and it was out of their hands, and so it just kind of drifted away, though it was affecting millions of people. And I think the similar thing risks happening with this and other topics in South Africa. But that certainly, I would have thought would be a key thing, is to keep public focus on it, keep asking questions. What's happened to those commissions? What about their recommendations? What are do the police have a special strategy? Because it isn't just affecting those murdered councillors and their unfortunate families, but the whole political process, the kinds of people who are going into politics, the people who are not going into politics, perhaps in a way is the bigger risk. People who are not taking the risk, it's just too difficult, and perhaps those are the very people we need. I think it's a very important topic.
Definitely. So, all right, let us go on to our next story now. And this is from the city of Tshwane, the municipality in which Pretoria falls. And we've had some rocky days with the anti-ANC coalition in the city. They had a lot of infighting, squabbling, there was some drama, but things seem to have sort of calmed down and were working better. Unfortunately, that seems to have fallen apart a bit now. So, as I'm sure you know, if you've watched the show or you've been reading the news, the city of Tshwane is in the midst of this terrible strike, illegal strike, where numbers of municipal workers are demanding a wage increase of, I think, 6%, whereas the city of Tshwane says that they can afford no wage increase at all due to the city's financial situation. Well, things were sort of holding steady, it seems, until quite recently, and the DA has come out swinging at ActionSA, saying that they have been stabbed in the back by ActionSA. So I'm reading from the DA statement here, quote, "Without consulting the multi-party coalition, ActionSA submitted an urgent motion to the Speaker of Council that seeks to compel the Executive Mayor to negotiate with the striking workers, as well as for the Mayor to consider what it calls legitimate demands put forward by labour unions. These demands include a 600 million adding 600 million to the wage bill, paying striking workers who have disrupted services for residents, and reinstating workers who have engaged in assaults and intimidation against Swaziland employees." They went on to say that since the official bodies of the unions have distanced themselves from the strike, that in fact this action would essentially be negotiating with what the DA called criminal elements in the city and not genuinely grieved workers. ActionSA responded, saying that they've been on an oversight visit to Mamelodi and Shoshonguve townships and said, quote, highlighted how service delivery in townships in the city of Tshwane has come to a near standstill, with refuse not being collected for weeks and critical repairs to water and electrical infrastructure not taking place, and municipal offices intermittently being closed. The oversight visits to the affected township communities reiterates ActionSA's belief that instead of ignoring the concerns of municipal workers, the city should proactively engage with labour unions to find a solution to the current impasse. Sara, what do you make of this story?
Well, I think the ASA suffered from a combination of naivety, panic, and a great dollop of convenient electioneering on this one. Because if you have your officials photographed in front of an area of horrible littering, a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's words to that effect. Now, they also don't understand much about industrial relations, and that is this: when you've had 30 years of a largely ruling party managing a public service that has been comparatively highly paid, underworked, etc. I'm talking in very broad terms, obviously. And there comes a point where the power entirely lies with the public servants and their representative trade unions. And in any industrial relations crisis like this, when everyone on the coalition has agreed, and beyond, even the ANC agreed that no increases could be given. Once you make that decision, you have literally got to be prepared to hang in there. And what's happened is they did dismiss workers, and now that things have got ugly, bad, protracted, the EFF is getting in, surprise, surprise. and Action decided to go in without consultation and just said, here's the optics. Oh my God, we're not getting service delivery. Guys, you're not getting service delivery because there isn't service delivery. And that's the problem.
Oh.
You have to weigh up the balance between the unfortunate situation of putting your constituents in a very unpleasant situation and breaking the backs of an uneven power play. And it just, Slibrink has taken that decision to do that. Now, first of all, if the strikers that claim they were unlawfully dismissed, they should be given the right to appeal. No more and no less. In other words, the individual strikers can come to the council and put in an appeal against their dismissal, which may or may not be successful, because obviously one doesn't know in every case what the reason was for the dismissal. The other thing is, they're demanding pay for the workers. I'm afraid if you go on strike, lawfully or unlawfully, you don't get paid for the time you strike. That is part of the power play. Now, if you cave on these things when you've made this bold decision, you just literally not quite going back to square one, but you're virtually going back to square one because you've lost your authority. You stuck it out there and then you conceded. You can't do that. You have to actually change the balance of power. And heartrending as much as this may sound, and I know there was somebody representing or some of the communities who clearly didn't understand the council system at all and really wanted to just have a go at the mayor. Really, none of these dynamics are either part of the equation, but they're also just not the way society should run. You do have to regain that power. And there may be different ways of doing it, but in the employment context, the way it's been done is largely the way it has to be done. And the employer at some point, if the employer virtually regains a power which it hasn't had for a long time and then loses it because of a combination of understandable yet very emotive and let's say convenient terms, the employer is going to be disempowered so fast, nothing will improve. It's very, very tough. It really is very, very tough. But my last point on this is that it's not just about the people in authority being responsible. Citizens have to be responsible for their actions. And in this case, the strikers and their trade unions have to be responsible for their actions. They contravene the law, there are consequences. Full stop.
No, I really agree with that. And what's really concerning to me is that this caving now seems to me that it would legitimize an awful lot of really terrible stuff that's gone on. So we've seen municipal workers attacked and killed in some circumstances. We've seen vehicles torched. We've seen all sorts of very nasty intimidation, the kind of stuff we also saw in the Cape Town strike by the taxis. And I can see more of an argument for saying ahead of time, look, we're not getting services, it's hurting people. Maybe we should negotiate a bit more or budge a bit. But once violence begins to be deployed like this, when you begin to see stuff like sabotage of electrical infrastructure and stuff like that, you're just going to legitimize the most awful way of getting your way if you cave in now. Michael, what do you think of this?
I absolutely agree. And in fact, in case Daily Friend readers and listeners and viewers didn't notice it, just a few days ago, Sara actually wrote a piece about this, the headline, "Wielding Power for the People's Benefit." And I think that's one of the key things here. It's, as Sara says, it's optics versus substance. The optics is easy. You might get some temporary relief. People would praise you for settling the strike and so on. But in fact, you've gone backwards because you have overlooked what is in effect the public's interest. There's a much, much greater interest that you are the custodian of as the negotiating council or the employer. Very difficult, as Sara says. I certainly wouldn't like to be in the shoes of anyone in those positions. But as you say, Nick, we saw very similar dynamics in obviously quite different circumstances here in Cape Town with the taxi strike. It does pay to just hang in there, be principled, stick to your guns, make a solid argument, acknowledge that there are costs, and there are, and some of them are tragic, and that is a terrible thing. But there is, in fact, a greater interest also. Sara concludes her piece by making the point that this is where Brink and this was actually before ASA stepped in, but this is where Brink and his colleagues' backbones have to stiffen. It's difficult. One wouldn't want to be in their position, but the point is, Pretoria Tshwane is obliged, as Sara writes, to try to secure the power for the benefit of the people it serves, and that really is the fundamental bottom line of politics, democratic politics. People are elected to positions to do, especially in this country at this time, we've got a huge backlog of things that need to be fixed. The only way to fix them is to do it with proper strategies, people who are prepared to work, and not to cave into just to kind of cynical actors. So I think ASA has played this very badly, and hopefully the voters will see that too.
Yeah, so I think the DA has lodged a complaint with the coalition committee or whatever. So it's possible that this may be resolved. The parties may be able to negotiate something between themselves. But it is a little bit worrying, because I think these are the kind of tests when there's actual pressure on that really show whether a coalition like this can work really well. For me, the worst part of some of the it's unclear whether ActionSA does support these demands, but the union's demands that, as Sara said, that people go back to work without any consequences, even if they've engaged in some of this illegal behavior. And that just can't be allowed to stand. Sara, any final thoughts on this before we move on?
Just to say that, what this country does need is as much law upheld as possible. The Labour Relations Act of 1995 was drafted, put into power by the ANC. They are the rules that apply to every workplace. It doesn't matter which workplace. And the bargaining council that's made much of, that they came to a decision that the DA disagrees with, so it's taking on review. That, in other words, the council said you must negotiate. You can't have it. That's questionable. That's going to court, and as it should do, and hopefully we'll get something meaningful out of that. But the rules are the same. And the rules that apply are the same. And the right to strike, like almost every other strike, every right, Freudian slip, comes with qualifications. And the qualifications are usually based on the fact that as soon as that right infringes on other people's rights, it has to be limited. And that comes from someone I'm not an absolutist of free speech, but I'm close. So, it comes back to everyone has to take responsibility, and perhaps it's even to say to the people who on the receiving end of this, the communities, is there times in which perhaps you've got to actually help yourselves a bit, because things are not immediately going to get better. It often takes a couple of years before these things settle down. So there's no easy solution to this. But if you don't grab the nettle, I think you'll just be stung by it, if there is such a saying.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to our last story. And this is going to the small neighboring country of Swaziland, or Eswatini as it was renamed in 2018. And they're having an election, which I'm sure to many people have at least some familiarity with Swaziland will sound a little bit surprising. But today they are casting ballots in a parliamentary election. Unfortunately, for the people of Eswatini, this doesn't really mean that much. Swaziland's parliament is very weak. It can't really do anything except advise the king on what to do. The king maintains pretty much absolute control of the country. And political parties are entirely banned in Swaziland. Individual candidates can run for seats, but if individuals happen to express, shall we say, anti-monarchical views or encourage reform, they tend to find themselves harassed or thrown out of the country at some point. Two previous members of parliament who had supported pro-democracy movements were jailed, and a third has fled the country to South Africa, I believe. A spokesperson for an activist group in Swaziland, in Eswatini, declared it's a misnomer to call what's happening in Swaziland elections. There have been protests over the years against the governance system in Swaziland, but these generally seem to have not really managed to go anywhere. The South African Development Community, SADC, has sent some electoral observers to have a look at the process of the election, but I don't really see the point, considering it doesn't seem to have much of an effect on the politics of the country. It seems almost to me like it's legitimizing something that really shouldn't be taken too seriously. It's a curious thing, Eswatini, because it is, you know, it is effectively an absolute monarchy, which is a system of government that has been rare pretty much across the world, pretty much across history. Even in like the Middle Ages, kings tended to rule with the consent of their nobility. There have been absolute monarchies in Europe, of course, from time to time. But it's so bizarre that Swaziland maintains this very strange, very alien system of government. Michael, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, you know, it's sort of tantamount to the ANC tolerating a Henry VIII in a neighboring country. It's just, it really is great. And you think, you know, you think of sort of English constitutional development, Magna Carta 1290, I think it was, well, 1215, it was initially drawn up, and it took most of that century to, I think 1291 was it finally signed, King John. So, you know, there's been a kind of long history certainly in the Anglo world of kings and monarchs being resisted by certainly by the barons and aristocracy and so on, and then eventually from 1832 onwards, obviously by the popular person, or the popular men at that point, the ordinary men. But so how extraordinary that in 2023 we have an absolute monarch in Eswatini. It's just such a strange thing, and it's very odd that it's tolerated. I mean, I just find it extraordinary. I see in the Reuters story they refer to Mswati's using public money to fund a lavish lifestyle which he shares with his 15 wives, while most of the country is made up of struggling subsistence farmers, and the country is blandly described by the US-based organization Freedom House as being not free, which there's no question about that. So it is rather odd that they've got an election, that they, you know, this pretense at some kind of popular direction or directing of politics, when clearly that's not in play. So a bit tragic actually, and a bit quaint. Yeah, tragic for the people who are subjects, I'm sure.
So I mean, I'm just trying to think of the absolute monarchies that exist in the world today. The Gulf states, Oman, Saudi Arabia, effectively. That's really about it, actually, I think. Sara, what role should South Africa be playing with regards to democracy in Swaziland?
Do you want to know what role they should be playing, or what role we will be playing? And the answer is we will be playing nothing, judging by more on the poser's feelings about interfering in other people's despotic countries. I think the real tragedy of Swaziland, you've got a very poor country. It's kind of poor, it's landlocked, it's homogenous, so you don't have, ironically, competing sort of tribal interests to sort of keep people on their toes. It's not really a country. It actually operates like not even a province. It operates like a tribal, like almost like, for want of a better expression, a homeland. I can't quite think of the right word I'm looking for. In other words, there is no impetus, there's no pressure on it to change, and because there's nothing around it or within it to challenge the authority. And unfortunately, because it's poor and destitute, globally it's irrelevant, you know, it's not, it's probably, I don't know, is it even the size of Israel? But, you know, different countries get different attention, and that's largely for a whole lot of reasons, but one of which is about what a country offers to the rest of the world. And Swaziland just isn't there. I mean, it's very tragic. I think Andre is correct in his comment, is that ultimately the Swazi people will probably just not take more of this after he goes. The problem is, how do people are going to have to live with it, because those who've opposed it have really suffered as a result. It's sadly its unimportance is the problem in global terms.
Mm.
Interestingly, because of its the fact that it's a monarchy, it is, I believe, the only country in Africa which has diplomatic relations with Taiwan and not with China.
That's
Which makes
bad.
it very, very unusual. Which is a view I have some sympathy for, but it's probably not great for the country's economic development. Anyway, that's all the time we had for today's show. Thank you very much for watching. We hope that you found it interesting, and we will be back next week with the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone.